For recording also happens
Yours is
sometimes,
working.
you know?
Oh, there we
no.
go. Yeah, put your. Hello, everybody. My name is Julie Walsh, and I'm a Chicago-based curator of digital art, and it's so nice to be back in my hometown. Thanks to Tezos and Blockhouse for hosting this panel today. I will make a few remarks to help us frame the conversation, and then introduce the panelists prior to getting into our discussion. Briefly, I've been in the art world for 40 years as an artist, gallery owner, and a curator. I'm also an art advisor for a Paris-based company art consortium that helps cultural institutions, galleries, foundations, and festivals integrate Web3 strategies. Digital art, and in particular, hybrid fusions with layerings of immersive technologies, or XR, allows cultural institutions and artists to connect at a personal level, to expand both their local and their global communities. Because at the end of the day, what is really important is the ability to talk to one another about art and life. I think that the layering of technologies, whether in full-scale live stream AR with projections, like in the immersive exhibition Enter the Plasticine with Tomoko Thiel and /P at the Meet Digital Culture Center in Milan, or synthetic corporal reality in the virtual exhibition space there, allows individuals to place themselves in history in a personal and intimate way. I am currently curating in the NFT Biennial using multiple modes of exhibition, including 45-foot screens, as well as individual viewing pods, monitors, and projections that will travel to 10 countries. So I think now is really the time to continue to brainstorm about how new media art, immersive technology, virtual worlds, and blockchain technology allows us access in alternative ways we are only now just beginning to understand. Access into communities that can support all aspects of art making, from the galleries, the cultural institutions, and the artists themselves. Access to anyone, regardless of race or socioeconomic status. Using blockchain technology combined with virtual worlds, we can create new patrons of cultural institutions and increase support for artists. I think here, the key is really to talk about, can we create virtual and digital art exhibitions for all? And how can new media and phygital exhibitions help with cultural, societal, and political healing? The new territory opened up by these hybrid fusions of physical and digital offer cultural institutions the opportunity to create access past their walls. And despite digital art being around for 60 years, the possibilities of exhibiting art in a phygital way makes this a new world with new paradigms for art making, collaboration, and most important, connection. There's never been a more important time to be involved in the phygital, and I'm excited to be discussing the many possibilities of digital art with our panelists today. And now I'd like to introduce the wonderful panelists here. Start with Christiane Paul, who is the curator of digital art at the Whitney Museum of American Art and professor in the School of Media Studies at the New School. She is the recipient of the Toma Foundation's 2016 Arts Writing Award in Digital Art, and she has written prolifically about digital art, media arts, and new media. Carlotta, over there, Carlotta Dochow. Carlotta is the director of Superblue with 10 years of experience in the contemporary art world. She's worked at Superblue as the company's first employee since its inception with Pace Gallery, building the project from an idea to a full-scale business with over 50 employees. At Superblue, she is focused on artist management, initiating and consolidating partnerships for the company, as well as leading on the company's Web3 strategy. And Elena Zabalev. Elena is the co-founder and CEO of CADAF and Digital Art Month. She is art and tech entrepreneur and has successfully built tools for artists, curators, and collectors in digital art and NFT space since 2017 with CADAF, the Digital Art Month, and the New Art Academy. So I think we'll just jump right into the questions now. I would like to start with Christiane. Could you tell us, and then of course I'd like all the panelists to respond, about your involvement with new media art, and specifically how your space has been addressing the phygital. And in your case, if you wouldn't mind giving us a little overview, a quick lesson on what is the difference between digital art, new media, and phygital, because I feel like some people in our audience may really enjoy that clarification.
Okay, thanks so much, Julie, and thanks everyone for coming. It's a great honor to be here with these great panelists. So I'll start with a little bit of history. The term new media art, I think, was first used very early in the 20th century when film came about, and then until the end of the 20th century really meant film video and other things, and suddenly it was co-opted by the digital and used for digital art as it gained more prominence in the 90s with net art specifically. I remember when I started at the Whitney in 2000, people kept sending me videotapes as the curator of digital art. And now I think more recently we have switched back to digital and to the core of the computable, and new media art has once again become a term for anything ranging from video to newer forms. The term phygital, of course, combines the physical and the digital, and I'll get to that in a second. I think that's always been the core of exhibiting digital art, but of course with new forms of XR and mixed reality and NFTs, we're looking at new forms specifically. So I've been exhibiting digital art for decades, for around 30 years. I've been working both in the online space, curating artport.whitney.org, that's the Whitney's portal for net art, and also exhibitions in physical space. And what makes digital art so interesting to me is that, opposed to other art forms, is the one that is least defined. There may be installations that have very strict requirements for this many feet and here's the projector, etc. But most of digital art gets reinvented every time you put it into the physical space in new configurations. Very often works are never shown the same way twice. I think what we're seeing more lately is this extension into mixed reality. I'm curating a show that is opening at the Whitney in March, which really blurs the boundaries in that the works consist of AR, physical sculpture, and all of those components are combined. And I think what the challenge of blockchain and NFT art has been, you experience it largely on the screen and on platforms or viewing apps. And how do you bring that into physical space? As a curator, you always have to start with the work. What does the work require? It's not that everything looks best on a 45-foot screen, for example. It's always a matter of, should it be human scale? Should it be smaller? Should it be more intimate? How do we make those decisions? Should the art become an immersive environment? Is it best if it's separated on multiple screens? So all of those questions you ultimately can answer only specifically to a work and what the work needs and what its core concept is and how it should be translated.
And actually, I think it might be interesting if you mention Oria Harvey's work because it's so relevant to this conversation.
Oops. Yeah, Oria's work, which is also in the Whitney Museum's collection, will be part of the exhibition I just mentioned. And Oria was, together with her husband, Michael Salmon, one of the pioneers of net art. Entropy 8 Super, Tale of Tales were their collaborative efforts, but she's also a sculptor by training, and her work and NFTs, which you've seen probably on various platforms, really cross that physical digital bridge. So you have sculptural work that is mirrored by a digital twin existing in an HTML environment, but then also accessible as an AR component. And what is very interesting about Oria's work, I think, is that she sees the digital file and the digital model as the work. The physical is a derivative of the digital work to her conceptually. And I think that's very interesting. It's not like, oh, here's the file from which a physical sculpture was generated, but she really places the emphasis on the digital, where her whole process of resculpting, remediating, refiguring takes place.
Thank you. And Carlotta, would you like to go next?
Yes, so in our case, so at Superblue, our relationship with new media art is that, first of all, we were born out of Pace Gallery, and Pace Gallery is a, let's say, quote unquote, traditional art gallery, as we call it in the NFT space nowadays, that has decades of experience selling object-based artworks. But they also, over time, have started representing some of the biggest names of the new media art space, James Turrell, Robert Irwin from the Light Art Movements, and more recently Team Lab, Random International, Studio Drift. There's a whole array of artists that that engage with all forms of media and digital art. And at first, at the very conception of what then became Superblue, it was the concept of how can we support these artists beyond the idea of selling objects. So Pace Gallery excels to this day in creating physical manifestations of digital art. How do we install a physical manifestation of a James Turrell in a collector's home and a Team Lab screen-based artwork? So it was really how to present digital art in a physical way to the highest standard. And I would say that Superblue is an evolution of that. It went beyond the idea of selling objects and into the realm of selling experiences. And we were really thinking from the start, how can we support these artists in a commercial way, because we are a commercial art gallery, to thrive and to be successful from the art that they are creating. And so at its very core, I think it was around 2016, we started exploring the idea of supporting these artists in the creation of site-specific commissions, be it in public spaces, in private collectors' homes, but really thinking about selling ideas instead of site-specific ideas instead of selling objects. That then evolved into the ticketed model, which is what we know today to be Superblue. We have, I invite you all to come and visit us, a big space here in Miami. And the idea there was that evolution of how can we continue supporting these artists. And we noticed that there's, new media art, again, comes in so many forms. And there's an element of new media art that is these large-scale immersive environments that it's very rare to find a collector to want to install that in their homes, but there's countless of people that will be interested in actually experiencing and paying to have access to that work. And so Superblue was born out of that concept, and the core idea is that we sell tickets and then we share the ticket revenue with the artists. So the artists no longer need to make those derivative, they can continue to do so, and in fact we still continue to collaborate with Pace Gallery for that object-based aspect of these artists' practices. But in terms of the more immersive and kind of architectural scale installations, we support them there. And then I guess now, today, the next pillar or the next evolution to that exploration of how can we support these artists, how can we support this art form, is Web3 and all the things that blockchain, NFTs, crypto, everything can offer.
I think it might be interesting if you mention your AeroBanquet project, because that's quite an interesting fusion of the physical with the digital or virtual.
Yes, exactly. And at Superblue, we're always trying to innovate in this way and really trying to find new ways of experiencing art. So right now we're very, very lucky to have a multi-sensorial installation at Superblue, which is a culinary experience in VR. called Arrow Banquets. It's on, I think, this week and maybe a bit longer. So please, if you have the time to get a ticket to that, I did it the other day and it was really fantastic. And the idea is that it combines not only the visual, audiovisual. An audiovisual engagement, but beyond that, also a culinary exploration. So it's very exciting.
Thank you, Carlotta. Elena.
Thank you. Yeah, it's great to be here today. Wonderful panelists. Thank you for inviting me. So I run CADAF, which is a crypto and digital art fair. We also do festivals, augmented reality festivals called Digital Art Month. And also do a lot of different educational initiatives. So CADAF was actually started in 2019 out of realization that there was no art fair that would focus entirely on digital art. And here we are in 2022. Well, it's still a very rare thing. And the more I go to the art fairs, the more I see how many beautiful digital artists that are coming to the space, the more I feel the need for digital art fairs, really. Because, I really don't believe that digital art should be experienced only on the computer screen or on the phone screen. And I mean, it's so great that we have wonderful museums where you can experience digital art properly, or galleries, but still, the art fair is a completely different animal, and I feel like, in digital art space, it's really, really needed. When we launched CADAF, we were thinking of different models, whether to work with only galleries or only artists. And at the end of the day, we decided to be very open. So we are working with a lot of individual digital artists, but also with the galleries, also with the foundations, with the artist residences, with pretty much very, very diverse producers of digital art. We also sometimes even have marketplaces acting as galleries and coming, to the fair, presenting curated selections from their works. So for me, digital is kind of the essential part of what we do, is because, because of different reasons. First of all, the mediums that we show also are very, very different. Sometimes we have digital installations that actually have physical digital sculptures inside the fair, and then they have also some virtual element. But even the most digital art becomes physical in a physical space. So I think that that's really, really important. For the Digital Art Month, it's actually an augmented reality mostly festival, so we show a lot of augmented reality works in the public spaces in different cities. We so far have worked with New York, Miami, and Paris, and we love doing these events. We collaborate with the city to place augmented reality filters, actually QR codes that lead to augmented reality filters in the public locations. And it's a very democratic way to enjoy digital art. We always, so far, one of the rules has been to have the filter either on Instagram or on Snapchat, just because the audience already has it on their phones, and so they can just, activate the filter and enjoy it, which I think is great. So, yeah.
Thank you. That was a very helpful answer. Let's move on to our next question. We'll start with Christiana again. Have you noticed a difference since the pandemic in terms of audience responses to digital, physical, and the digital art? And do you think the pandemic has influenced the way that digital art is seen today?
I think it definitely has in so many different ways. First of all, the world kind of moved online over the course of the pandemic. And it felt like a flashback to the 90s, because many people for the first time were struggling with the kind of technological connectivity that we were struggling with on a different level, of course, in the 90s. See you, see me applications, what does it mean to live and exist in online spaces and communicate with people? So all of that was very familiar to many of us who have worked in this field. And I thought that was one of the silver linings, that people got more exposed to that kind of mediation and it became normalized more, which I think is necessary in this day and age in terms of accessibility. And at the same time, it also helped with the acceptance of digital art. Yeah. Where I've seen a lot of confusion is in the space of exhibition and what that means. If I, a decade ago, would have said, oh, I'm curating an online exhibition, most people would have assumed, oh, it's an exhibition of net art that lives on the web. But as everything moved online and exhibitions were represented online, suddenly an online exhibition could mean anything. A museum exhibition in a gallery space that is represented on a website or in a virtual space on Mozilla hubs. So suddenly that became a very unstable term, and we have this categorical instability of online exhibitions and what they mean. And I think that has persisted. There's something interesting to it, but I believe there's still a lot to sort out. And also figuring out what is actually the best way of showing an exhibition and for what purpose. You suddenly have exhibitions that are mixing documentation of physical work in online spaces together with net art, and it becomes highly confusing. I think most people are, of course, statistically speaking, experiencing art online these days, more so than in gallery spaces. But I think we still need to maintain the essentials of the medium and of the artwork and what it wants to say and in what materiality it exists, and be very careful about representations. Another thing that the pandemic has changed in the exhibition space is, once again, this trend for skeuomorphic representation, that is representation of gallery spaces per se. And I think there's something to be said for replicating a physical gallery space if you want to give an audience an idea of what a show installed in physical space looks like. But other than that, it's super exciting to invent virtual spaces for showing the art here and give up on all of the constraints that we're experiencing in the physical world. And the same thing happened in the 90s when people tried to just replicate what the physical space looks like. I don't think there has to be a digital Whitney that looks like the physical Whitney in the metaverse, but there's a lot of potential in playing with new paradigms. So I think we're very much still at the beginning of working in all of those areas. And I hope that most gallery spaces, art institutions, museums will continue to stay committed to virtual programming.
And I think just responding to what you were saying, you know, the fascinating part of this is that digital art can be site-specific and has always been site-specific. And I think that's important, whether it's a virtual exhibition, you know, really taking into account the art itself and what is best for the art in that virtual space, physically, but in that virtual space. Carlotta, would you like to respond? Has the pandemic changed at all Superblu's?
Yes, actually, it's important to note that Superblue was conceived, let's say, pre-pandemic. So the concept of Superblue was cemented in late 2019. So obviously we didn't know what was going to happen, but then the pandemic hit. We had to delay the opening of our first space here in Miami by a year. So we officially opened our doors in May of 2021. And what was interesting is that at first we always knew, because we were dealing with this type of art, that there was going to be a digital strategy and a digital component to what we were doing, but we didn't think it would happen this fast. And then when we were all sitting at home, being productive online for the first time, and versus how we were used to working offline, we had to, you know, fast track what we were going to do. And so I really agree with what you were saying earlier. It's not about replicating what we visit physically in the digital realm. It's about how they can complement each other, and that's the big problematic that we are working on. And there is obviously an educational component that comes with digital. There's also a component of people that aren't able to physically visit. How can they also, enjoy the content that is produced and the art that's produced by our roster of artists? And so we are building an application, which, I mean, it was always in the plans, but it was definitely fast-tracked. And our first digital native experience is an experience by one of our star artists, actually one of my personal favorite artists, JR. And it's definitely a continuation of it. He's an artist that is very much rooted in the physical. He does public artworks worldwide using paper and glue, as he says it. And this AR artwork that we've done, actually in collaboration with Niantic, who's the company behind Pokemon Go, is very much linked to his physical art and is an evolution of that. And we're hoping to launch that in officially. A beta version is out there, but officially launch it in early next year.
Thank you. Elena?
Yes, so, when pandemic hit, we were supposed actually to go with our art fair to Paris, to a physical location, and we weren't able to. But we were really eager to do something, and we worked with the company to create the virtual art fair. And I remember the thinking that exactly we didn't want something that would exactly recreate either an art fair or be just like a 2D sort of environment where you view the art. So we were trying to come up with the space that would be innovative and where people can actually see the movement of one another and kind of have the interaction happening as if you are in the real space. And I think that was really great. At the same time, we also started Digital Art Month. So one of the reasons why we started Digital Art Month, this augmented reality festival, is because we couldn't host in-person events. So we wanted to place the work somewhere where people can actually enjoy them. And especially this first iteration of Digital Art Month in New York, it was really, really great because, in New York, everything was closed, and then all of a sudden people could walk around and enjoy the art. So, I mean, how it changed I just see a lot more art since the pandemic. I see a lot more digital artists. I see a lot more willingness for the artists to experiment. And of course, with all the market developments that were happening during it became sort of a push. So now, let's see what happens post-pandemic.
So I think my next two questions have to do with the future and what the three of you are really excited about. Specifically, are there areas within new media or digital art that you think will become increasingly important in the future, such as immersive art, XR like VR and AR, robotics, video games, biotechnology, 3D printing, generative art, quantum computer art, and computer animation? But what are you most excited about?
Well, I always don't like to single out one specific aspect. In general, I would say one thing I'm grateful for when it comes to NFTs and blockchain art is that they raised so much awareness of generative art, which literally is centuries old. But it's super nice, I think, that now we see more interest in the generative potential of digital art. So that's one thing. Then the areas that definitely have been very much on the rise and where we've seen increased activity is VR, which is in its third phase. AR has become much more normalized. So I believe we're going to see a lot more experimentation in those realms and in mixed reality in general. I think in the past there sometimes may have been a tendency to place too much emphasis on the separations of worlds. Phygital is, of course, exactly the opposite thereof. And what will really happen more and more, I believe, is this overlap and interplay between the two of them. And of course, technological developments also always come in waves. Another area which has seen an explosion is AI, of course, and I think we're just at the beginning of that. Oh, and I want to return for a moment to VR and those environments. So we're now seeing more multi-user virtual reality spaces and experimentation with that. And I think we're just at the very, very beginning of looking at really the emergence of more narrative forms and interactive narrative forms within VR spaces. So I hope that there will be a lot more of that in the future. I would also say no matter what the status of cryptocurrencies is, the blockchain is here to stay, definitely. And will be part of the future and is an interesting medium for artists to play with. And one thing I had been asking myself when the whole NFT hype, blockchain hype happened was, whatever happened to quantum computing? Because that was supposed to be the next big thing, and it was completely phased out by the focus on Web3, and now we're seeing more attention placed on it again, because the networking in quantum computing also has made rapid progress. And it's very interesting for me to see how the blockchain might intercept or how there might be an interplay between the blockchain and quantum computing in the future and what form that will take.
Thank you. Carlotta?
Yeah, I must say I'm excited about all of the above. I wouldn't be able to single one art form out, but I wanted to just develop on what Christian was saying about how Web3 has given or provided this awareness of generative art that has existed forever. But I think it's not just awareness, but it's also financing. And what's really interesting about Web3 is that it creates these possibilities for artists to have access to funds, because realistically, new media art, digital art, all these art forms are incredibly costly. And not only costly, they take time. And so there's, with the artists that I work with, there's a lot of research and development, hours of research and development that go into creating these unique experiences. And with Web3, there's new kind of commercial monetization business models that are given to artists to be able to continue innovating and developing. And so I think that there's going to be, thanks to this new form of monetization, there's going to be a lot more access to artists from from the most established to more emerging, to continue innovating. And I think that's going to lead the way to so many new and exciting art forms that we can't even think about today, but that are going to hopefully blow our minds.
Yeah, and that's very helpful, because you remember when we started the conversation, I was talking about access and community building, and the possibilities of Web3 in these areas are phenomenal. Elena, would you like to respond quickly? Because I'm hoping we could still perhaps get a Q&A in.
Yes, sure. So one thing that comes to mind is also collaboration. So I'm excited to see more collaborations between traditional and digital artists, between traditional institutions and new media, more emergent maybe artists. In general, when I see this going on, there is always something super cool and exciting happening. So I think that Web3 space is just, it's a greatest platform for collaborations, and I'm excited to see more of that.
I just want to mention one final
Sure.
thing as well. I agree with everything that has been said. I think there are still huge issues when it comes to access. Not everybody has access. It's not quote-unquote democratized space in any way. We're seeing once again the same mechanisms replicated in Web3 that we have seen in the commercial art world. Definitely more people having access to selling their work, but it's not at all that the playing field has become even in any way. So there's still a lot to do on that front.
I just want to add something. I think you're right, and I completely agree. I think in terms of access to artists more broadly, the spectrum of artists, I don't think we're there yet at all. Like, we're very much replicating. But I do think that if we're comparing art forms, I think Web3 has really put new media art, digital art, almost at par with more traditional art forms, be it painting, be it sculpture, et cetera. And so there is that equalization in terms of media and form of artistic creation, but I do agree there's a lot of work to be done in terms of access.
Okay, I think we have time for some questions.
Does everyone on this panel have 3D goggles?
Yes, I've had for a long time.
No.
Yes.
Do we have to pass a micro? Yeah, okay.
I have a microphone. I was interested to hear more about quantum computing. I am aware of quantum computing as far as large machines in those labs you read about when they're first launching these ideas, but I want to hear more about how it might be used in art as a material for artists and how accessible it might be for individual artists, what it means for artists. And I guess as someone who's interested in VR, would it be possible to ever have an overlap? I have no clue. I'm just asking the question. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'm actually asking myself that too. So to some extent, artists working with quantum computing today are, of course, relying on labs, on industry, making it available to them. Like with every new form, in the beginnings, artists have to go into the labs, work with corporations to get access. What I'm waiting for, and honestly have not seen yet, is art that really reflects also on the conceptual core of quantum computing. There are artists working with quantum computing, but honestly, if you look at the work, you would never know visually that it uses those technologies. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how artists conceptually might engage with interpolation and all of those interesting entanglement, exactly, and all of those interesting things. And yes, I believe there could be intersections with VR, but we haven't seen it yet.
I have a question on scenography. I mean, we've seen many NFT exhibits in galleries that is like literally a Best Buy store with screens after screens after screens, and it's almost like we forgot that in new media art there is a lot of research on scenography. So I'm wondering, what you think we can do to go beyond the Best Buy effect on screens?
Well, it's really I would also love to hear from you, but it's a curatorial question. This is the question every curator faces when you're bringing a digital work into physical space. When I did an exhibition called Programmed at the Whitney Museum a few years ago, together with our conservator, Carol Mancusi-Ungaro, and we actually reconfigured many of the online pieces, the artists creating new interfaces, revising interfaces for bringing the work into space, and Carol has called that experiential conservation in terms of that translation. So if you have an NFT or NFTs, looking at the core of the project, what is it about? What does it want to say? And translating that into space, whether that's immersive, projection-based, the arrangement of screens, if that is the answer. But I think there's nothing more boring than, as you said, putting up the Best Buy store and tiles of just digital images. What's the essence of the work? What is it about? How can you translate it? And that's what curators are doing with every digital work.
Yeah, I think the root of the problem is the fact that there was this whole discourse last year about death of the middleman, and the artists can have access to their own collectors, but actually the reality is that the art world has existed for thousands of years, and there are structures in place that support artists in artistic creation and presentation, be it curators, which are incredibly important, critics, and even art dealers. All this whole ecosystem is there for a reason. And so I think the NFT art space it just grew very quickly and in this kind of hype motion. And I do think that over time, gradually, these actors are also going to be present in the NFT art space. There's going to be way more, crossover between what is now called the trad art versus the NFT art space, which I personally find ridiculous. And once we start, bridging that gap, which is what I hope we're all doing here in a way, we're gonna be able to see much better quality.
And a very brief response, because we're almost out of time, but for the NFT biennial that I'm one of 10 curators, it was really difficult choosing the artwork for this because we needed artists who were conversant and fluent not only on the blockchain with their projects, but also across different modes of exhibition, because it needed to be commissioned for a 45-foot screen, very intentionally and thoughtfully, as well as there were then representations with monitors and projectors and individual viewing pods. So it was really required a lot of fluency in some ways across mediums. And I would just like to wrap up saying what a delight it has been to share with you our ideas on physical and digital and the phygital with all of my wonderful panelists. And thanks so much for your attention.
Matt, I can. How are you? Yeah. Do I sound okay? Sure. Sounds good. Uh, I can't. I can't see anything now. Yep. Yep. I can. Sounds good. Sounds good. You bet.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name's Marissa True. I'm the host of the Tezos ecosystem podcast called Tez Talks Radio, and also the content lead of Blockhouse, and in charge of curating this entire Tezos-led speaker series. I'm joined with me on stage by Baptiste Crespi, who's the founder of FX Hash, a generative art marketplace and platform, and Richard Entrup, a very prominent art figure, a collector and Gen A art enthusiast, I believe. And then on the screen we have Jason Bailey, who is the founder of Club NFT, looking excellent with his headband there. And so today we're going to discuss value in the eye of the creator. The principle of this discussion is to help us understand how we come to value blockchain-based digital art, because it is a relatively new field. Digital art isn't that new, but for some reason we are struggling to create the parameters for how we feel or sense the value of the art that exists on there, as diverse as it might be. So we're going to start off with the basics. I'd like to go around to each of you and get you to introduce yourselves a bit more thoroughly and what you do. So Baptiste, we'll start with you.
Hello, I'm Baptiste, ciphered on the internet. I'm the founder of FX Hash, a generative art platform focused on helping artists leveraging the Web3 technology in an open way. I'm also a generative artist. That's why I actually built the platform in the first place.
Richard?
Hi, Richard Entrup. I'm currently an advisor and investor for Web3 metaverse companies. Recently joined assisting KPMG with their Web3 metaverse strategy. Prior to that, I've been at Christie's from 2017 to 2019. I was a global CIO and CDO at Christie's. And I was also at CTO at MoMA at one point early in my career as well. So I've been in the art world twice. I'm also an NFT enthusiast, very passionate Tezos NFT collector, and lots of the Tezos artists are very dear friends. I'm actually curating them right now, so great to be here.
And last but not least, Jason.
Hey everybody, I'm Jason Bailey. A lot of people know me as Art Gnome. I'm early collector from 2017 and writer in my blog artgnome.com. And more recently, I'm the CEO of Club NFT. So it's a company designed to help people protect, or collectors to protect their NFTs, and of Right Click Save, which is the leading Web3 cultural publication out there. Nice to meet you all.
Thank you very much. So we're going to start with the bare basics, because I think there is a bit of a learning curve when it comes to understanding, say, the difference between blockchain-based digital art and digital art. So this is a question that's open to all of you. Is there an actual difference between those two art mediums?
Oh, I wouldn't say there's... there might be a difference if the artist decides to leverage the blockchain in a particular way for the art. But I would say that blockchains offer these layers to allow artists to sell their digital art in the first place, which in itself is powerful enough, I'd say.
Loaded question. So digital art is digital art. I think if you, in the case of FX Hash, you're leveraging the technology, blockchain, which is technology, to actually create the art. So certain artists like Kevin Abosch and Ryan Bell and Tyler Hobbs and others leverage and utilize the technology to create the art. And you've got folks creating art in all kinds of products, from Unreal to Unity and others. It's also digital art. But the blockchain component, one adds a certain element of technology to create it. It also adds the obvious ones of provenance and authenticity and a validation that it's unique, it's immutable, it's one unique digital asset. So there's a couple of different ways to look at that question.
So there's a few layers to the technicalities of it all that can actually differentiate those two fields. Jason, would you like to add your
Sure, yeah.
generation?
I think, as Richard said, digital art is digital art. It's been around for a long time, and it's actually been collectible for a long time. It's just been a very small group of collectors that had interest until blockchain and as a technology, but also as sort of a social movement through crypto art swept in. And what we saw was an amazing spike or jump in terms of interest in collecting digital art. We could talk about whether or not NFTs are the perfect format, but it's hard to deny that they coincided with a massive increase in interest and belief around the ability to collect digital art.
So then, using the term NFTs, I think that is probably one of the biggest hang-ups or hurdles that we're seeing in conversations around the art space, because I think that's sort of categorized these art forms in a particular way that have separated it from the rest. And given that there's a mass market for NFTs, not just art, but in collectibles, so we're looking at things like Bored Apes and CryptoPunks, and having to take on the task of dividing up the categories and saying, this is a collectible, this is generative art, this is, pixel art. How is that shaping the discussion even further about how blockchain-based art should be valued? Anyone?
I'll take that one, I guess. So I've worked in both sides of the art world. At MoMA museums, it's not about commerce, it's about inspiring people to connect with the art. It's all about the art. At Christie's, it's all about selling stuff and connecting buyers and sellers. So it's very two different missions. But to answer the question, I think value is subjective, based on demand and scarcity. But I think there are certain artists playing in this space, generative, digital, what have you, that they've got huge collector bases, and it's like every other artist, musician, or sculptor, or digital artist, they build, they connect with people, they express themselves through their art, and people connect with it. And that's a dynamic that doesn't need blockchain or anything else to happen. But blockchain adds an element of scarcity, uniqueness. It makes that JPEG unique. The big joke for folks who don't understand this technology is that JPEG, I can just right-click it, save, and copy it, and who cares? But they don't understand what the uniqueness of what blockchain does to that asset.
So in that, there's another layer to this, and I'm sorry guys, we're gonna go through a lot of layers. This is a bit of an onion, but we're looking at the speculative component of the artwork and the market value of it versus the inherent value in the subjective component to it. And Baptiste, this is where I want to rope you back into this conversation, because with FX Hash, a lot of the commentary has been about the sheer quality of the art that exists on there, and also the astonishingly low price points that artists are actually selling their work at. So it kind of implies that there is this mass field of art that's either being extremely undervalued or is still working on obtaining its legitimacy within the traditional art field. So what is it that it's going, like, what will it take for these artists to sort of be recognized for the quality of the work that they're genuinely putting out?
So the first and easy answer I would say is time. I believe we live in an era where generative art is going to be probably the artistic movement that will be the one that marks our era. I'm saying by that humans have been enhanced by technology, and generative art is like this perfect embodiment of this conceptual shift in how we interact together and with the world. And I feel with blockchains, we have, and the ability to collect digital art, it has given this art form a new, I'd say, depth, because artists can live through it and collectors can finally collect it in a more meaningful way. So it offers these new layers for the ecosystem to exist more and more and like develop itself. So I will say it will just take time. The roots are there. Conceptually, we just have to, make the right calls and build it in the right way so that when people get interested in it, they see that it really brings value to the world.
And to add to that, there's also, given how early we are in this entire endeavor, a lot of infrastructure needs to be built to be able to help people navigate this atmosphere. And FX Hash is a very open platform, so you have everyone from established to emerging to amateur artists who are putting out their work and experimenting with the tools that you guys are providing. So then, Jason, I want to ask you more about what you just developed, which is Pathfinder, and that is very much that next step in helping people navigate this huge field of new art to explore. So how does that tool help people?
Yeah, sometimes, so I'm a bit of a graybeard, so sometimes I compare it to when I was younger in the 80s. We only had like 8, 9, 10 different TV channels, right? But we could always find something to watch. And now we've got like 200 TV stations, and it seems like we can never find anything to watch. So this is going to be part of sort of this explosion of NFTs as we tear down the walls to participation so that more and more artists can participate at all skill levels. We see lots and lots of work that people now have to sift through to be able to find the work that they're most interested in. And sadly, a lot of times what happens is we see follow the leader, where instead of doing the work of going through all of this work and finding work that's unique or special to a given collector, they all just kind of follow each other. Who's the superstar? Who's selling for the most? Let me just buy the top names. And that's really not what any of this was supposed to be about, right? We were trying to build a broader foundation where more people could participate. So what Pathfinder does, it looks at who you're collecting, and then it looks at other collectors that have collected similar artists, and it's trying to recommend new artists to you to expand the number of artists that you collect. And we think that's one way that we can kind of support people broadening, who it is that they collect and discovering art that they love. So trying to use algorithms to actually broaden how many artists can be supported rather than trying to narrow how many artists are supported, if that makes sense.
What I've sort of likened it to in my mind, just because I find analogy very helpful, is when I find a song on Spotify I really like by a singer that I'm probably familiar with, and I just click those three little buttons and say go to Song Radio, and I ask the platform to generate a playlist for me that's going to give me exposure to artists I've never encountered before. Is that a fairly accurate representation?
I think it is, although we emphasize, I think, even further, sending you, we prioritize sending you artists that maybe have been overlooked or aren't being supported quite as much. So it's not just about showing you things we think you'll love, but it really is about trying to establish support for artists that haven't yet necessarily received as much support, while connecting you with art that we know, based on our algorithms, that will be appealing to you.
I would just like to add to that Pathfinder is a great example of the power of blockchains. Anyone can build a tool that leverages this decentralized ecosystem to sort of empower the different entities that live in it. And although like NFTs have started to blossom like 1 year ago, the ecosystem was literally not ready to accept the masses that try to get into it. So yeah, people have been interested by the money, but now we are seeing like sort of a downtrend in it. But also we are in the art field actually seeing like sort of an uptrend, just because people are starting like to shift start to understand where the actual value in this ecosystem is, and tools are actually being built to help them like understand where the value is, which was not the case 1 year ago.
So in that, basically what we're saying is that the tools are becoming a lot more user-friendly to encourage people to look at this field a bit more openly, because another question that we often get within this space is divorcing, crypto market prices from the value of the NFTs and saying, well, the art is worthless if the cryptocurrency that it's being sold in is worthless. And that is a very, very tricky conversation, because this is simply not true, is it? So, I mean, Richard, as someone who's very much immersed in both this emerging art tech world and the classic art world, how do you navigate that conversation? Is that a challenge that you still face, or how's that conversation evolving?
I think the intention of the collector is what determines the subjective value of the piece of art. The fact that it's blockchain, or what chain it's on, or what exchange they bought it on should be secondary, depending on the intention. If they're collecting PFP collectibles to get the latest traits of these works for profit, to spin it and flip it in a year for profitability, then it's a different conversation. I've never sold an NFT. I just collect them because I want to own the art. I want to support the artist. I want to show my friends that I have this piece. So it's like a true traditional art collector. The fact that it's blockchain and digital is just another facet to it. So I think the intention of the collector determines that, unfortunately, the association to crypto, blockchain is a technology. Cryptocurrency was the first use case for blockchain. The second one was NFTs, thanks to guys like Jason. Now the art world, now luxury brands are jumping on quickly, and soon insurance and healthcare and every other sector is going to jump on this technology and try to leverage it for engagement and conversion and retention and ultimately grow revenue. This is digital marketing. That's what it is. But in the art world, again, there's different collectors and different personas of artists themselves and collectors.
So when we're looking at the cryptocurrency aspect, yes, it was the first use case, but it was an extremely loud one, because it was a perfect opportunity for people to amass wealth at an exponential rate. But it has become this sort of insidious narrative across all other applications of blockchain technology. So what is it actually going to take to divorce the value of NFTs and like the inherent value of it from the currency that underpins it? And that's a question that's open to all of you.
Utility, maybe. So in our case, for instance, as the price of the cryptocurrency on our network goes down, and it's been going down for a while, the actual dollar price of the pieces on the platform tends to either stays the same because people are seeing the value of the pieces in dollar and not in the cryptocurrency itself. So again, I would say it will just take great applications and time so that the people can start seeing this ecosystem as something that's valuable for the world and that can bring value to them also.
Mm-hmm. And Jason, you spoke earlier of giving exposure to artists and creators that are perhaps flying under the radar, and because they're just not the dominant voices, but that is not to discount the quality of their work. And that also brings into the crisis of new technologies, which is always a bit of a diversity problem. How are platforms like Pathfinder basically ensuring that there is going to be better representation across a variety of geographies, genders, orientations, and so on?
Yeah, I think in a way we're building upon platforms like Baptiste's FX Hash, right? So it doesn't happen by accident. I think FX Hash has done an amazing job of building a platform that sort of embraces the early crypto art principles of allowing everybody to participate, right? And it's a lot of work. They've put in a lot of systems and rules that allow for everybody to participate in it. And I think we do see, actually, I hear a lot about how there's a lack of diversity in NFTs, and maybe that's true in the PFP space or certain segments, but I would say particularly in the generative art section, it's highly diverse because of platforms like FX Hash, and our goal is really to expand upon that even further and say, okay, not only is everyone welcome to participate, but we're going to help you find some of the people that maybe don't have as loud a voice or haven't been recognized as much. Another benefit of sort of having been in this space as long as I have is that I've seen these people like the X copies, that sell for millions and millions of dollars that everybody thinks were just born to be like the stars in the space. I bought their first work for $1, $2, 5 years ago, right? So it's, people aren't born to be, the dominant famous artists or whatever. It's about the exposure that they get along the way. And we all need to work together to make sure that the doors are open through design of platforms like FX Hash, but also that we continue to support actively through tools like Pathfinder to prop up new artists for people to see and say, look, there's a whole world of artists here. The old model of let's find a dozen artists and everybody, just collects that dozen artists. It didn't really support very many artists. It didn't really provide collectors with the best art out there in the world. And it wasn't really a system that really serves anybody in the long run, right? So we're proactively trying to architect tools and communities. FemGen is a show that I encourage everybody to go see today if you're at Miami Art Basel. It's female generative artists. And we came together as a community because we thought these are amazing artists that are underrepresented, aren't being supported. We need to proactively throw resources in to make sure that they get supported. So I'm seeing that in this sort of new art world that we're building at a really high rate that I'm really proud of from this community, but it takes work.
I'd like to add one thing. So Jason is probably my favorite human on the planet, but I'm going to disagree a little bit on the DEI, diversity and inclusion topic. I live in FX Hash and Object.com and many other vertical crypto, every other Tezos exchange there is. Generative AI, generative art, Kevin Abosch, Tyler Hobbs, Ryan Bell. The list is probably 90% white male, just for the record. So I'm going to disagree with that. However, there's other great AI artists, Sophia Crespo, Claire Silver. We're playing with AI art. So I think it's got opportunity to grow, but to Jason's point, I think his tools and other tools, as they become more pervasive, they'll ensure equity in the algorithms and the AI so that everyone gets to play on the artist side as well as the collector.
Baptiste?
Yeah, no, I was gonna back up this actually because, I would say that in Gen Art in particular, there is not so much diversity, less than any other NFT space, I would say. There's that diversity in what people create, but not who creates it. And yeah, it will be a matter of providing resources, as Jason said, to the underrepresented communities, so that they can have the tools and can have the knowledge, so that when they want to create some art, they have the abilities to do it.
And to add on to all of your points, I think there's a second conversation here, which is I think the vast majority of this point has circled the topic of gender in particular, but there is also the cultural aspect. So, later on this afternoon, I've curated a panel called On-Chain Geography, Putting Blockchain on the Map, or something to that effect. And I essentially wanted to find artists that represented regions from across the world, and that was an endeavor like no other, because not only was it a matter of whether there were people available or prominent enough for me to be able to reach out to, but it was their inability to come and travel to places like Art Basel, Miami Beach for visa purposes. It was their economic means. There were so many other layers of this conversation that provide a clear picture of all of the hurdles that they are facing ahead of even being able to enter this convention center. And so it's a matter of, how are we making sure that these guys also have access to these technological tools to be able to even have their name appear on the screen to begin with.
So I just want to add one thing. The ultimate pun in this topic is art mirrors life. And the biases that exist in the physical space are coming over to every industry throughout the world with women, female biases in physical devices like car seats and seat belts. There's bias in everything in society. So this is an opportunity. I think Jason raised the point. This is an opportunity, grassroots, clean canvas. Let's not bring those same paradigms and constructs into this new world that we're building. Let's make sure everyone can play.
I very much support that, and I will say that maybe unlike never before, if that's even English, we have now the opportunity with blockchain to leverage this automated system that allows entities to work together. And one of these examples would be the donation Ukraine smart contract we've put together. So all the platforms like redirected their fees, and the artists were like redirecting a part of their proceeds or all their proceeds to this smart contract, which would in turn split the proceeds to different entities that we picked as a community. So this is quite amazing, actually. Like in a matter of a few days, we were able to set up a system that can help like thousands of people to donate to particular institutions through an automated system. It's quite insane. And this is the kind of initiatives that should be put more and more in place, so that automatically, as the system grows, the different smaller entities that are like not properly represented can benefit from it.
And Jason, would you like to add anything?
No, I mean, I guess I agree with them that within generative art, it is maybe a little bit less diverse, but I think one step to us expanding that is through representation. So again, to sort of plug the FemGen show today, where there's more than a dozen female generative artists, I think when people see, that how many amazing women there are in the space, and that we could do more just to support them, never mind asking how do we get more, people to participate, how do we do a better job of supporting the ones that are here, which I think inspires other people to come in. So yeah, I'm excited about the direction that this is going. And I do think it gets a little bit better if you talk about NFTs more broadly.
I mean, I think there's a lot of relief in understanding that these conversations are very much a serious point, and that they are taking place, and that there is the recognition that, all of you are respective leaders in your fields, and if this is something that is very salient in your minds, then obviously we're making progress. But then does that salience translate all the way to the top? Because, we're sitting here at Art Basel, Miami Beach, probably one of the most established art institutions overall. Do we realistically think those conversations are being had in the same way that they're being had on our level? Because, I mean, Jason, I think FemGen is a phenomenal example of the power of pushing for diversity within this space. But at what point are we going to have the magnitude of that event represented here in the main event, Art Basel Miami Beach?
Yeah, we're ready to support it whenever anyone invites us. So, it's top of our mind in terms of, where we put our resources and time and energy. So, And I also wonder if really large events, and maybe I'll get in trouble for this, but I guess it's good that I'm up in Massachusetts and not down there. I also wonder if these events will continue to be the main event if they don't serve the general population, diverse population, right? So there's a real threat that old art world institutional events like this will become increasingly less relevant if they don't find a way to diversify. I think that's a reality across the board.
I think the NFT movement, culture, has definitely opened up the art market to a wide breadth of cultures and diversity for sure. The old art world was just not open, right? It was closed, very pretentious, you didn't feel comfortable walking into a gallery or an auction house. This has turned that upside down. Everyone's getting to participate, but to the earlier point on diversity and inclusion, we need to make sure that we keep that at the forefront.
Baptiste, do you want to add anything, or just echo the point?
Oh yeah, no.
Succinct, I like it. So yeah, I mean, again, the undercurrent of all this is sort of understanding where the power lies in these conversations and who we give the authority to as the gatekeepers of what we understand as value within the art world. And I was having a conversation earlier this morning with Fanny Lockube, who's in the audience, and we were talking about, oh, there we go, a little interaction, about how there is also potentially a crisis of diversity on the collector side of things. Like, if the collector space is also male-dominated, those collectors are also going to have an idea of what they see as the value in different pieces, and they may guide certain aesthetics that are going to rise to prominence. And if we don't have enough female collectors in the space being represented and showcasing what they determine to be valuable in the space, then we're tilting the wrong way, or we're not keeping it balanced anymore. So how do we not only encourage diversity for the artists, but also the institutional players as well?
So, I mean, as a platform creator, I would say that the first thing to do would be to build tools that are as open as possible, so that whenever someone that comes from a diverse background that's not represented wants to join the space, they can, because the tools are open and they don't have to go through layers of curation. But this is like really the first step, and this is like not enough. We need to build some sort of initiatives, which I am like maybe not as not knowledgeable enough to speak about this, but like this is something that we are looking internally. How can we truly support these initiatives in the proper fashion? Because we've noticed, and it's even worse on the collector side, that it's a space where most of the people are male, and I think it's a matter of spreading the word. It's a matter of building all these small tools that will allow this ecosystem to make sure that when the word is spread, it can effectively make changes.
Would anyone like to add to that point? Excellent. So then in that, we're about to go into another layer. Looking at the artists, like bringing this conversation back to the artists, there is an argument to say that when it comes to generative art, the artists have almost a little bit more power and sway in terms of how their piece will be received and valued. So if you guys have checked out our Tezos exhibition next door, you will see underneath the pieces that are minted qualities and traits that are described, and therefore you can also get an assessment of the piece's rarity. And so there's a couple layers there. There's the rarity of the piece based on the characteristics that are depicted on the image. Then there's the I guess level of recognition of the artist, then there's the number of editions, and all of these kind of come together to shape how we value that piece. Do you think that that power rests with the artist a bit more than it's ever done so before in the past? Jason?
Yeah, I mean, I think generative art's interesting in that a lot of people are as there are so many new collectors to generative art that they're starting to grapple a little bit more maybe this year than last year with how traditional guides to, let's call it analog or physical art, don't really apply here, right? So there's the question of when I can produce near infinite output from a single model, you know, does the scarcity of individual images matter as much? Like where if I were a painter, there's only so many paintings theoretically I could put out in a year, but with these new tools, you know, artists can choose if they want to put out hundreds of thousands of works, right? Now, that should give collectors pause to think about how much does the total amount of work that an artist makes matter to me. So for some people that are more speculative, maybe they're looking for an artist that's not going to put out too much work because they think that contributes to the value. But what I'm excited about is less that side and more about generative art's ability to make collecting affordable. I think you said earlier that FX hash, some of the prices are a little bit lower. Well, if you look at the entire volume of work that those artists are creating, they're doing pretty well, right? Like, you know, they could always do better, but like while keeping prices affordable, to me, that's not a problem. That's actually a solution, right? Maybe back to your last question about how do we expand who gets to collect? Well, when, you know, you can write an algorithm that produces, say, 5,000 instead of 5 outputs, right? You can afford as the artist to price them lower, which allows for more people to come in. So maybe generative art takes the lead in terms of thinking about how to make collecting relevant for a much broader base of people socioeconomically who traditionally didn't think of themselves as having enough of a budget left over when they covered the, you know, the basics in life to engage in something like collecting art. So I guess I see that as more of a feature and not a bug, right? That FX hash has affordable work that lots and lots of people could afford to collect that's also really high quality.
I think yeah, it's important. Yeah, I believe like in the beginning of FX, people were releasing work at a very low price, and it helped a lot artists to you know get a collector base and to collectors to be able to tap into this ecosystem with basically buying all the works that they would like. However, like at some point, we reached a state where like some good artists were releasing work, but were sort of following the trend of putting low prices, which would in turn result in collectors basically putting high gas fees on the blockchain to like get the transactions before the others. And art, like the bakers would get paid like maybe 2 times more than the artist in some instances, which was quite crazy conceptually. So we advocated a lot for telling artists to, if you feel like this is happening to you, you should consider like upping your price or maybe thinking of a different pricing strategy so that this problem don't arise anymore. And also, the art you're doing is like, the quality of it is really insane. So if you think that you should do it, don't be afraid. Try it.
So, I'm sorry, go ahead, Jason.
I was just going to say one bomb to kind of lob in there is that my opinion, for what it's worth, is that the art that sells for the most or sells most frequently in this space is very rarely the best work, right? So I think there's a mistake that people will make where it's like, oh, because it's selling for the most, it must be the best, right? But I think there's a lot of affordable work that people are like, oh, well, I can't afford to collect the top 5 artists on FX Hash or on this platform or that platform. But the top selling artists aren't necessarily the best artists, right? And when you use that lens, there's a lot of great affordable art, you know, that really just isn't in among those top sellers, if that makes sense. Sorry, Richard.
No, that's fine. Great point. Again, I tried to apply AI and machine learning to pricing physical art when I was at Christie's, and they didn't want to go near it because it was infringing on the value proposition of specialists, whose job is to price the art. Jason played with this, trying to set the ranges. He actually competed with Christie's when I was there to try to beat our price ranges for $60 million paintings. I think the artists in this space need tools. They're not mathematicians. Well, some of them are. They're creating generative art, but they need tools and utilities to help them price. They're not business people. They need help. They should be using the same tools that other industries use to price this stuff based on demand, marketing, segments, personas, all the basic functions of selling stuff. They don't have it. And I support many artists, and they all need help doing this stuff.
I second that. I think we were discussing this recently with the team. Artists are a bit clueless in this NFT environment. Like, you go from being someone in your room as selling work to thousands of people online. And, well, what is a market, how to tackle with that, like how do I even price my work, what is my worth. And I think it's about providing tools and educational content so that, well, they are not left in the darkness or in the blue when they reach this new world that's quite scary, to be frank. It's been very scary in the beginning for me, at least.
And to allude to Jason's point earlier, I think that kind of comes down to the very experimental aspect of this new environment, because you can put out 5,000 editions, and therefore, even if you keep the price point low, at least you can sort of get a sense of your popularity and traction, and that might be one of the tools you can use to start helping you apply or quantify the value of your work. But then, I mean, we've got 5 minutes on the clock, so I want to kind of close in on this conversation, which is another quality I've noticed about a platform like FX Hash is a lot of the artists that exist on there are also the collectors, and the collectors are artists themselves. So there's this loop that goes to demonstrate how artists are valuing one another's work, and I think that that's going to be one of the metrics. But to take myself as, say, a novice collector, and I'm entering into this realm, and I'm sort of getting a sense of who the bigger names are, who the established players are, who's emerging, but I still have no sense of where I should put, my Tez, as it were. How do I come to assess what I should buy?
If you like it, if you like the artist, if you like the vision, at least that's what I'm doing. It's not been very good like economically, but I never sell any work that I buy. I'm there for supporting the artists that I like to help their journey.
I don't think it's FX Hash. I think the Tezos community, art collectors, all help each other. Claire Silver, Lawrence Fuller, there's a long list that buy each other's work all the time. So it's just the culture of the Tezos community. A lot of them have gone to the dark side recently. That's another discussion that we're not going to have time for, but that's a really...
We don't speak of that name.
But it's a really powerful, so anyway, I think it's interesting point.
Yeah. To your question, how do I decide where to put my Tez or what to collect next? I have sort of a memorized response to this because I get asked a lot by new collectors, what should we do? And it served me really well, and I think it served a lot of other people really well too, which is I tell people, buy art you love, created by artists that you want to see succeed, for prices that you can afford, with the assumption that you'll never be able to resell it, and you'll always be happy, right? Where people get into murky waters is when they're like, oh, this artist, regardless of whether or not I like their work, appears to be going up. Let me try to buy that to ride that train and sell it to someone else who maybe will like it more since I don't really like it. And that's when the house of cards falls in. So, buy art the art you love, buy artists that you want to see succeed, be smart about it, don't spend money you don't have. And worst case scenario, you're stuck with a great collection that you love.
Yeah, I think I would have seen it slightly differently in terms of to completely disregard the speculative aspect in trying to flip an art piece and trying to see the value and appreciate and use it as a bit of a get-rich-quick scheme. I think I'm looking at it more in terms of when it comes to a medium like generative art, which has a few more dimensions to how you come to assess value. It's sort of understanding what that is. So it's how do I learn more about the artist? How does the number of editions matter? Or how should I assess rarity when I'm looking at the piece? Or if I think it's a pretty picture and I like it, but I come to find that the code that underpins it is a bit rudimentary, does that devalue it in my eyes? It's sort of finding a way for everyday people like myself to see this artwork and think, that to me is a quality piece. It's, there's a craftsmanship here. How do people learn about that? Where do they go?
Well, we don't have the time to answer that. There's too much to unpack there. It's such a wide field and there's so many components in it that it takes time for artists to get into it. But if you want to collect properly, I'd say it takes maybe as much time to educate yourself. Try to understand first the market dynamics, but also conceptually what is this art form, how does it work, what are algorithms, why is Zancan like such interesting in the way he draws the plants that he draws, and there's too much to unpack. But
and if you don't want to go there, just go the PFP route.
Don't go the PFP route.
I would say, one of the things that I encourage people to do is to actually, there's a free programming language called processing that a lot of these generative artists got their start on. And it's designed for non-programmers, right? For everyday people. So it's created by Casey Reese about 20 years ago, Ben Fry and Casey Reese. And if you really want to start collecting generative art and understand the differences and the nuance between the pieces, even in an hour or 2 hours of just open up processing, download it, and play with it. And it's designed for everyday people, not for super technical people. And change a few numbers and hit play and see what happens. I think that's one of the fastest ways to become really smart about how these things are being built and what's going on, underneath. So yeah, really encourage folks to actually think a bit about programming, and to Baptiste's point, learn a little bit about the algorithms. It'll give you a greater appreciation too for what's being created.
So it's a little bit of research, a little bit of experimentation, and a whole lot of trusting your gut. Baptiste, Richard, Jason, thank you so much for all of your perspectives. Hopefully we've enlightened people as to where they can get started in this entire journey. And if there are any questions, just come find us at the Tezos exhibition. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, perfectly. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. 1:30, is that like 15 minutes? Okay. Alright. I can hear you actually. Penny. Yeah. Yeah, I can hear you. And I actually also heard Alana for a second. But I think she can't hear us.
No, I don't. Can you hear me? Just change some settings around. Can you hear me now? Yes, the computer volume's on. Can you hear me now? just try again.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Oh, yeah, I see what you mean. How about, can you hear me now? Oh, great. Okay, I can't hear you. So let me, now I can hear you. Okay, it's done. Sorted. Thank you for that. Yes.
Yeah. So, sorry, Thomas. Yeah, Primavera is just emailed saying.
Hello, I'm here. Hi. Yes, hi. Yes, very well. Yeah. Yes, I'm in the train right now, so I will turn it on as soon as I get home. But I will be there in 5 minutes, yeah.
You're on mute, and I can't see your. You're on mute, and I can't see your. Oh, it says me talking. It's actually Malcolm. It says Thomas Krumenbacher, but that's actually me. Alana and Penny, can you hear me? You are on mute, and it's just.
Yes, I can hear you. I can hear you.
Incredible.
Yes.
This is huge. Can you see me or just hear me?
I can see you as well.
Oh, you
Yes.
can see me. Okay, great. It's like this panel could have been last year. Everyone's just on Skype. Sarah? Hi. What's happening?
The traffic is totally understandable.
The traffic.
Well, and just also walking from Mission.
Sarah just got here. We have to admit Primavera into it.
Yeah, so Primavera.
Sarah Conley when I introduce. Okay, and then everyone's going to do their own intros. Okay. I'm just going to. Primavera's back. Hi, Primavera.
Hello.
How are you? All right, everyone. Welcome to NFTs, DAOs, IP, and Redefining Art Law. We're starting the panel. 3 of our esteemed panelists are in different parts of the world, traveling or online. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm Malcolm Levy. My work involves both NFTs and DAOs, so I'm very interested for this conversation as there's a lot of really interesting issues, to really discuss in and around that. We're joined today by Primavera De Filippi, Sarah Conley Odenkirk, Penny Rafferty, and Alana Kushner. I'm going to ask everyone to quickly introduce themselves, and then we'll get on to the questions and discussion. First of all, I'll pass it over to Sarah.
Hi, thank you very much for having me here today. And I'm sorry that the rest of the group is online and not here, because I'd love to shake everyone's hand and say hello. Really excellent group. My name is Sarah Conley Odenkirk. I'm a partner at Cowan Debates, Abrahams and Shepherd, and co-head the Art Law and NFT Practice Group. And I will keep it short, and we can get to the questions.
Amazing. Primavera, you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Primavera De Filippi. I'm a researcher at the CNRS and at the Berkman Klein Center at Harvard. And my work is mostly on copyright law and blockchain technologies. And I've been focusing on what are the new legal challenges that are raised by the technology, as well as the new opportunities that it provides. And I'm also the co-founder of the Koala Foundation, which is an international organization that has been working since 2014-15 on trying to bridge the gap between blockchain and the law, focusing on various issues related to smart contract DAOs and copyright questions. And then finally, I'm also an artist, so I'm doing blockchain-based art pieces, but using NFT, or not using NFT, but using blockchain as the new medium of expression in order to explore new ways and new artistic practices.
Amazing. And Penny?
Hi, my name is Penny Rafferty, and I guess where I come into the DAO field, predominantly rather than an NFT spectrum, is through the art world and using DAO thinking and DAO philosophy to really hold the art world accountable to resource distribution, equality, and actually the production of how we create works underneath this sort of new emergent technology as a guide. My research has led me to creating in 2018 a white paper called the Black Swan, which is specifically around Berlin's local art scene, that then actually 2 years later has become a fully fledged DAO, which is maintained by myself, Laura Lotti, Callum Bowden, and Lise van der Hecker. And this really sort of separates the users and the stakeholders between two different sort of resource pools, one being active and one being staking, to sort of change the flows and dichotomies of art production. And alongside that, I've also been working with Ruth Catlow. We're both principal investigators of the Blockchain Serpentine Lab. And we recently released a book called Radical Friends, Decentralized Autonomous Organizations in the Arts, which I can happily say that at least Alana and Primavera have heavily fed into the collection of knowledge that has been gathered by myself and Ruth over the years. And so I'm also really looking forward to this conversation.
Lovely, and it's an incredible book. I think it's meant so much to so many people in the space. And finally, Alana.
Hi, everyone. My name is Alana Kushner. I am an art lawyer and curator. I'm the founder of Guestwork Agency, which is the first dedicated art law and advisory practice in Australia. Since 2019, I've also been leading the Serpentine's Legal Lab as the principal investigator. And the Legal Lab explores how the law can better support collaborations across art, technology, and science. And we do that by investigating legal issues and also prototyping solutions for the art tech field. And this year, we produced a series of live sessions on Twitch, which are looking at some of the most urgent issues around art, tech, and law today. And so these topics have included, for example, artists and creators and cultural organizations, creative agency in the metaverse, as well as looking at Indigenous sovereignty and the concept of Indigenous cultural and intellectual property and how that operates in the metaverse and in the broader Web3 space. And as part of my role at the Serpentine Legal Lab, I also provide sort of internal mentor support to Serpentine Commission projects for their artists, for their curators, as well as other labs as well, so like the Creative AI lab, sort of navigating the legal considerations that they're faced with when they're producing and disseminating art and tech projects. And finally, we also work with academic institutions and other cultural institutions in exploring these sorts of legal issues as well. For example, recently with Koala as well, as part of their licensing task force that Primavera is leading. So very happy to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Lana. And that kind of is a great kind of intro into kicking off our first question. So, in talking about NFTs today, or even DAOs, really, we're talking about a much longer history of digital art, of artist-run organizations. And I'm just wondering, maybe starting with Penny, if we could talk a little bit about sort of the history of artist-run communities, the history of digital artwork, and how it's been looked at with regard to IP, with regard to rights, with regard to creation, starting historically, and then how that's led into the information and the understanding we have today.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a rich history in terms of artists organizing not only about their own rights, but also sort of wider societal rights as well. I mean, I think one of the maybe most poignant and oldest examples of this would be the Art Workers Coalition, which began in New York in around '69, which was sort of implementing a sort of economic and political reform, specifically against the Museum of Modern Art, but also spreading over and across. And I think, that really sort of burst a bubble in terms of artists really feeling that not only did they have to be on the side of production, but they could also be on the side of demarcating specific terrains that they actually wanted to work within, and also to maybe sort of stand up against the pyramid scale of power. And I think we only saw this sort of grow, actually. Of course, in a way, maybe what's the sort of difficult part about this is that there was a huge amount of energy and traction from the artists themselves, but I'm not sure whether we sadly saw such a huge shift in the actual organizations. But, in 1985, probably one of the most famous ones would be like the Guerrilla Girls, or Grand Fury, which was coming out of the ACT UP AIDS activist movement. In the 90s, you've got Critical Art Assembly. But what I think that's really interesting about those specific legacy art collectives is that what they were doing were really trying to create a sort of interface between wider societal conditions and actually their own sort of worlding. And I think that's also what we begin to see in a much more sort of fundamental way quite recently with people like Terra Zero, creating legal interactions for a self-owning forest, or BitNation, or even Bail Block, that were providing Monero mining units to create collective pools, liquidity pools of money that then would be sent towards the abolitionist movement and prison reform regulations. And I think that that's also really interesting in terms of like how do artists attach the necessity around how they position themselves legally within now the new context of DAOs and NFTs. What I would say though is that I feel, and maybe Alana and Primavera and Sarah can speak a lot more to this, but I feel like that there is a lot of way to go in terms of actually getting these entities being pinned and held accountable on a very sort of universal and global and basic level. And what I would also say, that's something I thought about in terms of this sort of initial question would also be about accessibility as well. You know, we can have beautifully progressive laws and legal status, but how do we get that into the hands of people that need it?
Absolutely. Alana, Primavera, I'm going to hand that over to you to just kind of take it from there on those questions. I think that's a really interesting question around kind of coming historically to today. Like, what are the structures we're looking at, and how is that affecting what we're seeing today?
Well, I can give you the pretty dry, boring legal perspective, and then Primo can take it into a more interesting direction again. But I guess I'd say from a pure legal perspective, DAOs are at the moment largely treated as, something like an unincorporated association. And so what that means, if you're a member of a DAO, is that you as a person are responsible for the risks, the opportunities, and the risks that are taken on by the DAO. So, if a DAO was sued, it wouldn't be possible to sue the DAO per se without it being incorporated, without it being its own corporate entity. You wouldn't be able to sue it if it wasn't a corporate entity. And so that means that you'd have to bring the claims against the individual members, and they could potentially be sued for the conduct of the DAO. So there is this kind of direct exposure that people who are members of DAOs currently have. There are some jurisdictions around the world that have taken steps to treat DAOs as incorporated entities. So what we call, in legal terms, that kind of corporate veil, that, if it's a company, it sort of divides the people behind it, protects them from the risks of what that company or corporation is doing. So there are jurisdictions like Malta, Delaware, but the approaches that have been taken so far have been quite disparate. So yeah, that's the kind of dry legal perspective on DAOs.
No, that's a great start. And I mean, it's very interesting. Like, one question I kind of have as a follow-up, and I'll wait for if Primavera wants to talk a bit past Alana, is the difference between a DAO that is owned through ERC20 tokens versus a DAO that's owned through NFTs, and why that's become such a huge issue today.
Yeah, maybe, so I hope you can hear me because I'm in the street. But maybe I can also add a little bit on the question of like the legal status or the legal recognition of DAOs, because we've been working with Koala since now more than 2 years on the development of DAO model law. And the idea with this DAO model law is to actually, it's kind of like I'm gonna use a bit more legal slang maybe, but it's about leveraging the notion of functional and regulatory equivalence in order to identify the extent to which an existing DAO, which doesn't need to register as an LLC or blockchain-based LLC, but because it provides similar guarantees, or because it identifies new ways to fulfilling a particular regulatory or policy objective, then it can be recognized by the regulator as being functionally or regulatory equivalent. And so we created this DAO model law, which essentially claims that there is an opportunity for regulator to approach the question of legal recognition of a DAO in a more innovative way, in saying that there exists some technological design and some technological guarantees that can be provided by DAOs. And if DAOs do choose to implement this particular technological design, which can be held to be regulatory equivalent to existing corporate rules, then given this technological choice, then it becomes possible perhaps to recognize legal personality, potentially even limited legal liability for those specific DAOs. And it's a way of basically providing a way for practitioners and DAO people to identify what are the technological ways in which specific regulatory constraint can be implemented so that it becomes actually possible for a DAO to even fulfill the formalities that currently are required for existing corporation or organizations. And then concerning governance, I think it's actually quite interesting the way in which the governance of DAO is evolving. Historically, DAOs were mostly governed through like token-based system where it was mostly like economic transferable tokens that are governing the DAO, which basically means that you don't really control who governs the DAO because those tokens are bought and sold at any time by people that oftentimes are more interested in the speculation of DAOs, the speculation of the tokens instead than in the governance of DAOs. And now that we are implementing those kind of like NFT and more generally like non-transferable tokens, which are more community-bound and specifically given to people because of contribution that they have made or because of action that they have made in an external field, then now we can actually start creating governance structure which are much more interesting, in which we can distinguish between the economic model of the DAO, which is ERC20 based, or token based, transferable token based, and the governance, which becomes much more granular and much more bound to specific identities, or at least to specific activity done by particular accounts. And usually it's a combination of both, right? Like you can give some kind of privilege to the economic tokens, and then other type of privilege and like more substantial perhaps governance powers to the people that are actually holding particular NFTs and like soul-bound, I don't like the expression, but like soul-bound tokens or community-bound tokens.
That's really interesting. That's like literally what Refraction's doing right now. So it's very interesting to hear that advice or where it's going right now. Sarah, do you have anything to add on to that as well?
Yeah, I mean, there have been so many issues brought up that are really fascinating. And I think that one thing we need to think about is the purpose of the community organizations. And so Penny brought up the Guerrilla Girls, and I mean, they're a fantastic group, but organized for the purpose of making social commentary and pushing back against things that they see as being unfair or needing more attention. When we're talking about DAOs that are investment DAOs or community-based groups that are coming together in order to support artists or to support whatever they're supporting, we have to look at the purpose of that organization. And so to Alana's point, there's obviously the legal perspective of what the liabilities are and whether you're being held liable as an individual or if you're participating in a group. But there's another aspect to this as well, and I think Primavera, I think everybody has touched on this to some degree, which is about identity. And so you've got some really interesting social identity questions, but you also have legal identity questions that need to be looked at. And when you're talking about putting together a group that has some rules, more or less rules, that are intended to be guiding investments, then you've got a whole other level of governmental interest that comes into play. And so the government is really interested in protecting, I'm speaking in large generalities, in protecting people against fraud, against corruption, against people coming in and taking people's money and walking off with it. And that becomes difficult when you're talking about mechanisms that allow for anonymous participation or pseudonymous participation. So I think that, in looking at these structures, both from a community perspective, a social perspective, and a legal perspective, we have to really take a look at what the purpose of that organization is and what existing regulations may be applied to that operation.
That's a really interesting point. So one thing that I've heard from a lot of different folks and friends that are part of either Refraction or other DAOs that I'm in as well, or that are running different DAOs or part of that main organizational group, is a lot of the work would be considered almost in some cases charitable, or nonprofit work, very similar to like an artist-run center or a nonprofit festival, while other work might be more commercial in purpose. How do you look at a DAO within that context, where you have these different actions happening?
Well, I think that's one of the main concerns, right? Is that you can't come up with a one-size-fits-all response. It has to be based on more granular details and more stated purposes. And based on that, we're going to see either existing regulations being applied to the DAO structures, or we're going to have to see some reconsideration for how organizations are treated. And there's going to have to be some movement in terms of the anonymous nature of the blockchain registrations that are indicating the memberships in those communities and conversations.
Very interesting. So I just wanted to throw it to the other side of that, meaning NFTs. So Alana, I'd be interested in any work that you've been really looking at or researching in terms of NFTs specifically, in the same way as DAOs. Like, what is the legal consideration for NFTs right now? As we know, a number of museums have started or will be starting to collect NFTs. There's a lot of discussion around that right now. Obviously, a lot of people have collected NFTs at this point. Like, what is the actual legal structure? How is it looked at compared to any other sort of like formal contract with regard to, you know, purchasing art or digital contracts before that, or finite or anything else in between?
Well, again, like our observations with DAOs, it's very much a concept that is still being worked through from the perspective of the law. And, you know, the law being jurisdictional, what that means is that ultimately we will see perhaps slightly different approaches taken by jurisdictions in their treatment of NFTs. There have been a couple of jurisdictions to date, some high courts, the High Court of the UK, the High Court of Singapore, which have actually looked at the treatment of NFTs as property. While that might be seen as almost an assumption that NFTs are a form of property, that's something that, again, the law has to work through, and the way it works through that is by having these ideas tested in courts. That is one of the ideas that have been tested. Of course, the intellectual property issues that come with NFTs has received a lot of focus in the past year and a half. Something that we've been interested from the perspective of the legal lab to date, and this comes off our previous research that we did in collaborations across art and technology, where you have multiple people working on a project, is how NFTs support these collaborative projects or don't. And so, you know, I guess part of our early research into NFTs back a year and a half ago is we conducted an analysis of the different terms and conditions of various NFT platforms, trying to get a sense of where they had consistencies, where they had inconsistencies, and while they have certainly evolved in this, you know, year and a half, there's still a lot of work to do in terms of particularly navigating the IP issues that come up with NFTs. And by IP issues, I really mean, you know, who has the right to use the NFT, and in what ways do they have the right to use that? So licensing of those NFTs. So they're very much live issues that are being explored.
Definitely. I think IP is one of the most interesting things, both from a DAO perspective and from a NFT perspective. And it is changing all the time. And of course, there are a lot of artworks that, and just works in general, that are running on the blockchain itself. They're, you know, it's blockchain artwork as opposed to just work that might just be, you know, an image based on whatever media is being created. Like, what are the different interests and concerns that you're looking at right now, Primavera, Alana, and Sarah, with regard to that aspect of things, like how IP is even analyzed, protected? What does it mean in a space like this?
Can I maybe suggest Sarah answer this? Because, you know, Sarah was one of the early lawyers in the space working directly with artists and coming up with interesting ways in which to navigate this field. So.
Lovely.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's, to me, one of the most fascinating core issues in the space, and something that hasn't quite figured itself out yet. But obviously there are existing intellectual property laws that do apply to the content, sort of broadly speaking. And the question has been, how do we communicate those rights? How do we communicate what the artist's intention is? How do we figure out how to embed that articulation into the blockchain process or the NFT process? And so, again, very generally speaking, it's about establishing standards and protocols that can be adopted on a widespread basis, and that's still working itself out. One of the things that I've been looking at for the last couple of years now is how do you attach those articulations to NFTs in a way that can be communicated to the collector? And we can look at the terms and conditions, and terms and conditions are so important, but that really only impacts the primary sale. And once you get beyond that primary sale, you need to have some other way of indicating what rights do or don't travel with that digital asset. So you've got metadata, and so you can build some of that into the metadata, but that can be limited. And of course, that depends on which chain you're operating on, what the standards are in terms of developing and exploring that metadata. What I have been most comfortable with, and hopefully at some point the technology will become more sophisticated to allow for different options as well, is to have kind of an old-fashioned agreement written out that's attached also through the blockchain mechanism to whatever asset is we're talking about. Even at that, even once you have the articulation positively going out to the person who's collecting or purchasing, you still have a question of enforcement. So enforcement becomes a really complicated challenge when you're talking about DAOs, as Alana pointed out. You've got a group of people that may or may not be part of an official organization. So do you have an organization to go to? Do you have individuals? And for an artist, a creator making their work, how do they go after somebody who has infringed or done something inappropriate with the work that they have put on the blockchain and sold through the existing mechanisms?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's very interesting. And historically, to go back to that, original conversation, there have been these different kind of digital authentication contracts that have happened over time, and it would be probably really important for them to become part of any major sale in NFT market.
Right. I mean, the issue to me at the core is calling what comprises an NFT a smart contract. Like, that language is very confusing to people who are used to working with contracts because there's not a contract there. And we do have to figure out how to better navigate the agreement portion of the relationship, both in the digital space as well as the physical space, of course.
Right, absolutely. That's interesting. Smart contracts are not contracts.
If I can jump on. So this is precisely the work that we've been doing, again with Koala, with regard to the NFT licensing task force. Precisely because of, as Sarah and Alana have said, there is a lot of legal uncertainty around what is the IP rights that are being provided when one is purchasing an NFT. By default, it is absolutely nothing. And the other default is that the terms and conditions are stipulated by the platforms on which those NFTs are being sold. And the problem is that these terms and conditions can be changed at any time. And if I purchase a token at day one, and then after a while the platform is changing the terms and conditions, I have a very hard time actually proving that at the time in which I purchased the token, I had specific rights that I might not longer have. So we've been working on this token-bound license, which is essentially a way of incorporating a legal contract, a copyright license, directly into the token that is being transferred in such a way that whenever the token is being transferred, then the license is also being transferred. And the way we've done that, because it's actually a little bit challenging in the sense that you don't want to require the licensor to do a new license or to create like a long chain of sub-licensings every time the token is being transferred. And so we created a system of like conditional public license. So the public licensing schema is quite often used in the context of open source licenses or Creative Commons licenses. But we made it conditional to the fact that in order to benefit from this public license that applies generally to the world at large, the condition is that you need to be the holder of a particular token, which in this case will be the NFT, on a particular ledger. And so that means that you can both license the work under a particular license and then provide additional legal benefits to whoever is the token holder of whatever work is associated with that token. And in this way, it actually creates, like, it eliminates the problem, as you say, Sarah, of like, yes, the smart contract is not a legal contract, but the smart contract is a very nice way of incorporating a legal contract by referencing it into the code, into the metadata, in such a way that the license is now bound with the token. And so the information about what are the rights and conditions associated with ownership of the token are no longer defined at the outset, either just at the primary market or only via the terms and conditions of a centralized platform that have the power to change them. But it's actually incorporated directly into the token, and it is bound to it, meaning that no one can change it, but also the term and condition follow the token, which is, I think, the only legally meaningful way to actually implement this type of licensing. So we actually just released that token-bound license just a few days ago. So yeah, I think if you Google it, you will find it. It was a collaboration between Koala and the IC3 at Cornell University.
That's incredibly interesting. And, you know, it's a huge point because, you know, recently there were some platforms that were taking away artist royalties. And this kind of happened out of nowhere. And when we were getting ready to do a specific NFT for refraction, we realized that there wouldn't be royalties for any of the artists if we were going to drop it in this way. And we actually worked with a bunch of developers to like rewrite the contract, working with OpenSea and with Zora to make sure that royalties would retain for artists. And then, of course, sharing that code everywhere. And I think it's something very interesting. How do you make sure that that happens in a world that is changing so quickly? You know, because a lot of artists would never even know that. And this is like a very, very wild part of it, is that people can just change things like terms and conditions on the go, which is, which kind of leads me into my last main question, which is about AI. So, you know, I think this is one of the main things that everyone has been talking about right now, and I don't know if we're going to have an AI DAO that just creates itself and continues to grow. There are a few examples of things like that already happening. But I think it's a very, what is the consensus right now on AI and you know, DALL-E and DALL-E 2 and these different forms of AI with regard to art, with regard to NFTs, with regard to artists' rights, etc.?
I mean, I think, Primavera's Plantoid project is a really interesting example of some of the previous thinking around some of these issues. Obviously, I'm not going to speak to it since she's here, but I think that was one of the projects that initially got me super interested in this space in general. But we cannot avoid the issue that AI is often scraping material that is owned. You've already got intellectual property rules that apply to all of that material. So we're going to have to see some way of managing that. Already we're starting to see some licenses for underlying materials. And so I'm not sure that the process of using AI to create the work is going to be the best use of that technology. I think that there are better ways to use AI, more creative ways to use AI. This is not to diminish the creativity that goes into coming up with the seed phrases that generate these interesting images. But I think we're going to have to look at more innovative ways to use AI to instruct the growth of the art, as opposed to just simply scraping images and combining them and saying that that's somehow a product.
Absolutely, and there's a huge difference too between something like that and, you know, building GAN models that are of your own work and your own history and things that are not related. It's a very interesting, it's, I think, one of the most interesting topics right now, because also it's moving so quickly and so much can be done. You know, you have computers working at this speed in terms of the machine learning around that's just wild. Anyone else from our Skype group?
Yeah, I would love, sorry, maybe Fanny, go ahead.
You sure? Okay, I'll just be quick. But I actually just referring back to both of your questions and this one and the previous one. I think that it's been time and time again proven in the past that commercial entities even last longer than many communal partnerships, even when the communal partnership has like optimum conditions in which to survive in and thrive in, which is also extremely interesting, of course, when we're speaking about these NFT markets and about DAOs and Web3. And as much as I think that it's extremely important to have these sort of legal infrastructures set in place, often as a sort of potentially outsider, it feels that we're almost creating a slight moderation of one-to-one of a system that we already have. When we speak about royalties, when we speak about ownership, these are things that are existing in the world that we already live in, and they don't necessarily function well. At points, they can protect us, they can allow us to survive, they can allow us to have voice, but at other points, they maybe often create borders because we understand them to be legal conditions. Therefore, they're not mutable, they're not fluid, and they're not easy to navigate. And so I'm also just wondering in terms of maybe we have an opportunity within NFTs, within DAOs, and potentially even within AI. Is this actually a lot about maybe social contracts that come into play as well? You know, how do we actually begin to behave with each other? How do we register certain ethics, such as, you know, an AI not taking property from an artist or cultural worker that has an IP? You know, isn't that social pressure that can actually create a law of its own if you begin to refuse to participate with these types of technologies that are actually having kind of ethical consequences? So it's maybe not really an answer, or just sort of thinking aloud of these, moving balls.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the purpose, one of the biggest purposes of Web3 is to redefine. And, you know, if you're not redefining, then what are we doing? Primavera, if you want to go next, and then we're all going to wrap it up after that. We're basically right at time. This has been fascinating.
Yeah. Basically, I wanted to make a note on the fact that I think that there is a lot of people that are like trying to explore this kind of interaction between AI and blockchain technology. I think to me they are related, but in a very tangential manner, where AI is mostly about, I would say decisional autonomy. So we are creating systems that can decide things on their own because of like the training model that they have. And instead, blockchain technology is more about operational autonomy, right? So the Planter project does not incorporate intelligence in the sense of AI intelligence, but it is autonomous. It is autonomous in the sense that it has its own capacity to operate independently of anyone having to run the server, execute function, and so forth because of the blockchain capacity. And it's using blockchain technology and cryptocurrency as a way of capitalizing, retrieving funds in order to then use those funds to hire other agents to do what it needs in order to survive and reproduce. And I'm actually currently working on another project, which is another type of blockchain-based life form, which is also an artistic project. This time it's completely on-chain. And the idea is really to create those blockchain-based creatures that come with particular features, whether those are like physical attributes or governance attributes that people can give, people can interact. So it goes back to the NFT, where most of the NFT are things that you own and collect, whereas this one is an NFT that you cannot own, but you can interact with the NFT by feeding those creatures, by petting those creatures, and they create attachment to you. And when they are attached to you, you can give them new genes. And so you can actually make an evolutionary system where every time a creature with specific gene reproduces with another creature, and that gene is being transferred, then the person that gave the gene will capitalize some of the funds that the creature has acquired. And so in this sense, it creates, again, like is it AI? I wouldn't call it AI, but it is something that has evolutionary capacity and operational autonomy, and that is leveraging the capitalization process of blockchain technology in order to thrive and in order to replicate and in order to evolve. And to me, this is where it becomes really interesting, is to create a different type of AI in which the intelligence is actually provided by people. It's people that need to conceive of and identify which one are the genes that will be the most popular and therefore will be likely to reproduce more and therefore will provide more return on the person that invented that gene. But we're not delegating to AI this, and yet we are using blockchain technology to create those systems that are autonomous because they don't need anyone to survive except for the people that they pay or that they reward in order to provide those new features to them. And I think this is an interesting distinction to draw, the distinction between operational and decisional autonomy, where AI doesn't have operational autonomy. AI just can make decisions, but it still needs a lot of computational power and people actually running those AI. Whereas the blockchain has this autonomy of being able to run on its own, and the decision-making or the governance structure is still depending on people, but it's still autonomous because they can reward the people. The people are not doing it for altruist purpose. They are doing it because they're being hired to do this by the blockchain-based systems.
Amazing. Well, I think that's an amazing place to end as well. Looking at the human around all of this, it's so important, that interaction. You know, I think it's something that doesn't get talked about enough, the humanistic aspect of what folks are trying to do in Web3. I want to thank all of our panelists, both here and abroad. Thank you so much for joining us today. This was, absolutely fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.